Moving my paper around just to get that gesture. So this is really breaking up the hair, really making it look like there's some more depth in here. My pencil tip is really sharp, and it's okay to keep sharpening that tip if you find that it gets blunt, because you get a better result if the tip is sharper than blunter. So I use the pencil last, especially with Prismacolor. There's a little bit of a wax, so it sits on top of the color instead of blending in with the markers. I'm also going to use a couple different pencils, only because right now it's still all really one tone. If I just use this one pencil, all of the work that I did to make depth into this piece is just going to disappear. We're just going to step back from this a little bit and just move on. I'm just going to pick a brown, just work down here by the boot. I'm just using a brown so that I can have a little bit of a contrast between all this blue and this green that I've been using. I could use a black, but really just for the feel of the character, black is just too harsh, because black has a tendency to weigh things down, so we want her to look light. So I'm going to start using this blue again. Go very lightly, because you've already set the shadows here. You don't need the color again with the colored pencil. You're just adding a little bit more drama. So then continuing with my brown, and just continue outlining this way with that idea of pushing softer where there's light, pushing harder where there's shadow. Because all that work that you've done toning might be for naught if you don't pay attention to these things. Now to define the wing a little bit, I go back to this blue, the lighter blue color, and just start defining the fine line edges of this feather here. Not too darkly, still want to keep it soft. It's good to note that you don't have to completely outline this feather, because we want this to remain light and airy. You can just have just an impression that the line is completed here, and you can see just by having this line here and this line here that your eye will just complete the object. So now moving on to her skin color. I don't want her to be too dark, so I picked out colors that were really muted but still looked lifelike, because I don't want her to look like she might be dead. I picked my eggshell, the parchment color, which I won't use too much of because I don't want her to look too dark. And then of course the buff. So we're going to start with our eggshell. Just move it from here. The reason why I don't start at her hairline right there, I kind of want to leave that for a little bit of a highlight. This is one of the places also where you really need to know how much your paper bleeds, because this is one of the areas where such a small space like this, if your paper bleeds a lot, can completely close up with your color if you're not careful. So I'm just going to use a colorless blender here, just so this line here isn't so defined. Now at this point it looks really dark and she looks really unnatural, but as soon as these colors start to blend, it'll start to look a little bit better. This technique was a little bit different because I didn't go directly into my darkest color. I want to be a little bit more careful with the face because a lot of focus is going to be on the face. So now we want to go into the parchment and get to these areas inside the ear where there is a lot of definition of this shadow, right here behind the hair where it might cast a little bit of a shadow. I'm just going to use a little bit of a blush pink here. Just a little bit on her lip, just a touch. And then use the buff to just pull it down a little bit more. And then the eggshell to pull it down a little bit further. Then I want her eye to pop, so I'm just gonna use just a dot of this blue. If you don't keep a highlight in there, it looks a little dull. She looks a little lifeless, or like she's not paying attention. I'm just gonna define the eye just a little bit here. Just start adding some shadows in here, some lowlights. Just using the brown a little bit to give her a little bit of a shadow where her lid would cast some shadow over her eye. Of course, to keep the feeling the same as her hair, just color it in with the blue so that her eyebrows match her hair. Now again, just stepping back and looking at the piece. So I like where this is going. I feel like it's pretty good where it's at. Might start adding the background now. At first, I had decided to do something really dramatic with the background, but it was just too much. It detracted from the figure. So all I did is I just defined an outline for a shadow, and that actually really defined her as a shape. So what you want to do to start out, just sort of map where her shadow is going to lay. So I wanted to make sure that maybe you saw a little bit of a definition of her face down in the shadow. I'm just going to draw her a little bit, just reverse her. So then for her shadow, I wanted to get a color that was not black. So I chose a French gray, which tends to be really warm, and I got different tones of the French gray. French gray 20%, 40%, and 70%. So I'm just going to start with my lightest yet again. Of course, keeping the line moving. I'm moving this way just to keep that gesture, kind of like with the hair. Just keep it moving so that it really looks like it's going this way and the light is coming from this direction. And don't worry too much about these streakies here because you're adding a deeper tone. So this one is the 40%, not the 70%. Instead of going from light to dark to using the middle to blend these, we're going from light to medium to dark. Going to our last tone, which is the 70. And again, keeping this closer to her, because this is the darkest part of the shadow. So we're not taking this too far out, because her shadow isn't going to be very dark far away from her. This sort of really light outline that I made of her face, just to be a little bit of a shadow that's cast there, using my lightest tone. It is so far away from where her head actually is, it's not going to cast a really defined shadow. Just a few wisps of hair, maybe. And just take the 20 to maybe just blend all of these parts together. And of course you can use that colorless blender just to soften where the shadow sort of is supposed to fade out a little bit. So at this point, I feel like I'm pretty much finished with this piece. But before I want to say that I'm completely finished, I just want to step back from the piece and see if there's anywhere I can take it. And at this point, I feel like I've gotten it to a point where I've accomplished my goal of making her feel airy, making her feel ethereal, but still giving her enough definition that you can see the details in her, that she's not ghostly. She still feels like an angel. So I think I'm just gonna leave her here.